we've been told our whole lives is don't express things, man up, tough it out, don't talk about our feelings, just go ahead and just do it. And we know where that led us to a bunch of pain because feelings need to happen. They're real. They're part of the human experience. And when we suppress them in our lives, they will come out in other ways.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Rickesh Lakhani. Rickesh, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Thanks for having me, Mallory. We've been talking about it for a while, and I finally get to be here. Hooray.
I know this feels so long overdue, but I'm glad that we sort of circled back and are making this happen. I'm so grateful for the work that you do in our space. I want to give you a chance just to introduce yourself, tell everyone a little bit about you and your work, and then we're going to dive into emotion and what it looks like for us to give ourselves and others space to feel our feelings and in all different sort of crevices and corners of this work. So start by just telling everyone a little bit about you.
Thanks, Mallory. Hi, everyone. I'm Rickesh Lakhani. I'm the founder and lead consultant of Radiance Advisory and got almost 20 years of experience in this nonprofit charity social impact world. Most of it focused on fundraising. So for a number of years, I was a campaign director and then moved on to becoming an ED of a small community-based org. So it was kind of have a different range of experience. And a couple of years ago, just was like, I really want to work in sort of a broader scale and work with, leaders and organizations in a different way. And so I founded Radiance Advisory. And most of my work is really around aligning values with day-to-day behaviors, because that's how values really turn up. So whether it's in your fundraising or marketing or your board governance, whatever it is, but definitely a focus is on fundraising. So I get to go work with lots of cool folks and do that. And then outside of that, I love camping and bike riding, and I have 3 young kids and married. So we have got like lots of family time built in there as well. And I just like to, have fun and talk to awesome folks like you as well.
Well, I actually feel like that last piece that you were talking about in terms of your work is sort of a great segue into this conversation about like emotions. So one of the things that inspired my sort of looping back around this episode was this post that I saw you put on LinkedIn around your son's growing pains, which I'm also dealing with that with my daughter, and sort of what it looked like and felt like for you to give him space to feel his pain and process it with you. And that's something I think a lot about, not just in terms of pain, but all of our emotions in the work that we do. And I feel like there are certain compartments of our work where we have this idea that we're not supposed to feel things or we're not supposed to feel our feelings, like particularly around fundraising, right? Like we get rejected and people are like, don't take it personal. And so there are these like spaces where we're like, emotions don't belong there. And I want to sort of open up like what happens to us when we do that, when we shut that part down in one area of our work. And then is it even possible if we do that to stay value aligned? So I'll just sort of like tee up that initial like thought and see, what comes to mind for you.
Yeah, I think that when you ask the question of what happens when we suppress emotions and we don't encourage people to feel and honestly be human, that's really what we're suppressing, is being human. And when I posted on LinkedIn, I was really speaking from me being a man, and what we've been told our whole lives is don't express things, man up, tough it out, don't talk about our feelings, just go ahead and just do it. And we know where that led us to a bunch of pain because feelings need to happen. They're real. They're part of the human experience. And when we suppress them in our lives, they will come out in other ways. So when we think about it in like the workplace environment, I think there's definitely a balance to be struck in terms of how do we allow for some of this? How do we hold space to recognize that people are human beings and you can't just turn those things off? There's always this pressure to surgically separate the personal and professional selves. And the truth is you can't really do that. You bring a lot of yourself into your work.
Right. And I feel like in our sector in particular, we're asked to do that in so many ways, right? Like we're asked to make it personal when we work on the weekend. We're asked to make it personal when we ask our friends and family to give, right? And so then when people say, don't take it personal, I'm like, you really wanted me to take it personal when you wanted to pay me that? Like you made it personal in all these ways that were convenient for you, but now that my emotion is uncomfortable for you, now you want me to not take it personal.
Yeah, you could identify something really big there. We're always encouraged to think about our personal connection to the cause and our passion when we're thinking about, well, yes, we want to do pay increases, but we can only do so much. But think about why you joined this organization and why you want to do this work. And let's be real, that's exploited all the time in our sector, in our space, to justify low salaries and to justify lack of compensation, which we're obviously something we're trying to work on and start, push on those conversations. But it's like that part you're okay with. But all of a sudden it's like, well, actually I've got a kid who's sick at home. That's okay. That's your own personal thing. I still need this work to be done. And you still gotta, oh, you've got plans this weekend. Well, this meeting's come up and I need you to sort of take that on. So it's like, we can't talk out of both sides of our mouth on that.
Yeah. And we're asked to like be personal and vulnerable and connected with our donors. And so it's like, we just like imagine that we have these like on and off switches where it's like, build a deep relationship, connect, like exactly to your point before, be the most human you can be. But then the moment you step into this other side of your job or this other side of your work, please go back to being a machine.
Yeah, I can't turn off the tap. We've opened up the floodgates for all these feelings. I can't just turn it off. There's another layer to what you're talking about too, Mallory. Is like when we say open up to donors, get personal, and then we don't create the environments where we support people to actually go into those conversations and feel, safe. We know the kinds of things that happen that, of course, it's not all donors are bad. I know that, but we know what happens. It's very prevalent in our sector, sexual harassment, racism, all these pieces. So we're telling people to open up and be vulnerable and share emotions and try to get connections with donors. And yet one, the other thing happens where we don't do anything about it when donors get too personal or when things don't go the way you thought and that donor was personally did something that was very offensive to me or was hurtful to me. And that was very personal. And we're like, no, well, that's okay. They give us a lot of money. So there's a lot of layers in this too, in terms of like, what is the balance here and what kind of environment is conducive to people feeling like they can even open up and share? Because I think a lot of people from either their experience with their identity or experience in past workplaces have just closed a lot of that off. And so I actually don't blame them for doing that, because if this is what you've experienced before, it's going to close you up too.
Absolutely. And from a lot of my research lately, there's so many things in fundraising that also lead us to shutdown, to like a nervous system shutdown, rejection, uncertainty, isolation, power dynamics, like pressure. All of those things cause us to actually not be open to connection, aside from the trauma and systematic, like oppressive elements that then obviously people have to create space and boundaries to stay safe, And so, yes, there's so many layers here. One of the things I thought about when you wrote your post, and that's coming up for me now in this conversation, is this piece around, and I kind of hinted at this before in terms of, when we want people to take it personally because it's helpful to us versus when we don't want them to take it personally because it's uncomfortable for us, is this piece around how so much of like when we are and are not allowed to feel our emotions is about the comfort of the other person, right? And a few years ago, I did this reel on Instagram about crying. And I was like, crying is this incredibly important thing. It regulates our nervous system. It's so good for us to cry. And when we hear don't cry, it's not because crying is bad for the person crying. It's because the other person is uncomfortable with the tears and doesn't know what to do. And they're trying to get you to stop doing that so that they can feel more comfortable. And when I read that post about you and your son, I was just so aware of the work you must be doing. And I feel like I have to focus on this too a lot inside myself, to not have my discomfort around my child's pain have me restrict the space they have to feel their experience.
I'm going to
Does
pause
that
for
feel
1 second.
true?
Yeah, so I'm going to pause for 1 second because I think the first part, I missed like about 10 seconds of it. So I heard when you come in talking about crying, but it was like frozen, or I don't know, I didn't get the audio. So I want to make sure I didn't miss anything before I respond to what you said. Is your question really just around what about like this idea that we have to, it's about other people's comfort? Is that the core question? Because I can probably answer it.
Yeah. So like, what do you think about like the work we have to do as individuals to be able to like hold space for the emotions and pain of another person?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I've absolutely been doing a lot of personal work for sure. It's not easy and a lot of people don't want to go there. And I'm not special or anything like that. Anyone can do this, but we all have different life experiences, how we were raised, our childhoods, other life experiences along the way that probably shape how we respond to other people's pain. We all have, whether you believe in attachment theories or whether you believe in emotional response styles, personality types, whatever it is, we all have different ways of approaching things. And for me, and when I wrote that post, I was really talking about how we have to unlearn so much of what we were taught when we were younger. And I'm not criticizing how we were raised in the sense of, I really do believe everyone did the best that they could in that time. There was a different focus on life. I know for my family, it was like really about resources. Like, let's make sure we have enough. We came to Canada for a better life, so to speak. So when it comes down to emotions, it's like, we don't have time for that. We don't talk about that around here. And when a lot of us, I'm talking to the men right now, for example, is that you likely, more than likely, and you maybe didn't, had a father who was a strong silent type. If you had a dad figure in your life, they were probably a strong silent type. And that means that they don't talk about emotions. Emotions are expressed. You get penalized for expressing them. And so we're often going to either repeat or rebound against what we've experienced. Like, I'm not an expert in this area. I am married to a social worker therapist. So I mean, that does help. But like, it's like, how do we work within ourselves to see how am I responding and where is that coming from? And is this really about me? Is this about me not wanting to go to those places because I've been trained that way? And that is so hard to sit there in that moment, pause and say, I want to tell him your pain isn't so bad. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. And well, that's still okay, reassurance. But in the point where it's like, don't worry, it's going to be okay. And then I leave. If we're going to be holding space for other people and I'm still working on this, it really is about getting out of our own way. But in order to do that, we have to really identify where these patterns are coming from within us and see if there's anything we don't want to replicate anymore. So for me, knowing that when I experienced pain or when I experienced anything like that when I was younger, there was no space for it. And you were just told to like put that aside. That I didn't want to do that with him because I know how that made me feel and how it also comes up in my current day. So it was like, how can I make sure that he knows that I'm a safe place to come to express this, that it's okay. And especially again, because I know how when he's in the school, for example, how other kids are behaving with him and not everyone is sort of doing this. And so he's being influenced that way too. So we also have to recognize, let's say if we're talking about parenting specifically, we're not the only influence in that person's life, whether it's your colleague, your employee, your life partner. We're not the only influence in that person's life, but whatever role we do play, we want to make sure that we're going to where that person is. And that's really hard if you've got all this other junk you're trying to get out of the way and clear up.
I think there are a few things about what you're talking about that I feel like are so important to kind of like double click on. I mean, I think this piece around like awareness of our own sort of reaction and auto responses and the way that things come up is so important because I feel like we often hear terms in our sector like psychological safety or like this is a place where you can feel your feelings. But like then as leaders, we haven't always done the inner work to be able to truly hold that space. And then we're reactive when it happens. And it's like, we can't just say, I mean, I love the way your work is around alignment and values. And I feel like you can put values on your website all day. But if you haven't like done the inner work to be able to like hold those values for yourself and in your body, and even in moments of stress, and even like come back to it in moments of stress, not that we all don't get thrown off at different points, but like that you have a level of self-awareness around what it looks like when you fall out of alignment and to come back, like it makes it so hard to create culture around that.
Absolutely. There's always like 3 layers to everything. There's the individual, organizational, and systemic levels. So on an individual level, there absolutely is work we can do. And I also know in this space, we're often literally feel like we don't have the time because of all the constraints and all the demands put on us in this work. And so you don't maybe even feel their space. So an individual who may even have done some of this work and may even want to hold that kind of space is just like, I have so many demands and I have so many things going on in my life that I don't even have the emotional availability to do that. And so, and a lot of people are also trying to figure out where their role is. Like I speak a lot to leaders. When I say leaders, I don't mean anyone can be a leader in the organization, but people usually with some kind of decision-making authority, where people are coming to them with all kinds of different things, and encourage them to say, holding space and being vulnerable doesn't mean you overshare. And also as an organization, that as a leader, you probably have to find some other outlets. Like you cannot put all of that onto your team members too. So there's all sorts of other nuances to this, but the core of it is what you said, where if you're going to be in a position to do this, rather than you're going to tell them, oh, I have an open door policy, you can come and you can share anything. Well, the truth is you don't want everyone sharing everything. I mean, it is, in the end, it is a workplace. But can you get to a place where, especially when it relates to the work or relates to the person's situation of what they're going through, if they're going through something personally, it's going to show up in their work. So how can we support that without, we're not therapists, but can we provide benefits? First of all, like I really do feel like unlimited talk therapy should just be available for everybody all the time, and not even organizational. That should just be societal, but we're not there yet. So how do we support people through those difficult times? And how do, for example, when somebody is experiencing something, then, and they have to take some time away, we don't adjust their workload. We don't like say, oh, you're away for a few days. We're going to make sure that all this big pile of stuff isn't waiting to come when you come back. So you have the space to sort of process and deal with things emotionally. So there's other layers to this, like the type of environment we want to try and create so that there even is room for some of this stuff. But I do feel a lot of the issue on an individual level is we're just so crunched. And so how can an organization look at how do we allow for life to happen so that when things do happen, we have room for some of these conversations. We have room to even have conversations around emotions and as they relate to our work. So a lot of us have issues with conflict, for example. So when it's a donor says something and you want to realign the conversation in a certain way or express something back to them, because of the power dynamics, because of so many other things, because of our own relationship to conflict, you might be just like shut down, right? We might just be like, I can't say anything right now. I don't feel like comfortable. And I get all that. I'm not pushing people to go beyond, but we have to understand a lot of those things if we're going to really open up and have those conversations. So there's individual work, there's organizational leadership work. And then obviously as a society, we just have to get better at being able to not penalize vulnerability, penalize honesty, because sometimes those two are related. And oftentimes when people are being honest about how they feel about something, they can get penalized for that too. They're like, I don't feel like we should be doing this because it feels wrong to me. And something, that person stops being invited to meetings. They get pushed out of the organization if they're seen as someone who's too honest for the powers that be, I guess.
Ooh, there's so much like wisdom and so many layers, like you were saying, to everything that you're talking about here. The thing that keeps coming up for me as you're saying this is this piece around time. And maybe this is too big of a topic to like lob out in this conversation, but I think I keep thinking about the stakes. Number one, the stakes of not taking a beat to do this stuff, to give people the ability to feel their feelings. And also the fact that I think we have this idea that allowing people to feel their feelings means they're going to spiral downward into some, like, they're going to cry all day in a corner. And when so much of emotional expression and giving space to pain or discomfort is a second, right? It's like that, like, oh yeah, I'm nervous about that, and acknowledging and validating somebody's feeling. And that moment allows people to move through a feeling that when suppressed, when we don't have time for, actually manifests in so many other, maybe less visible ways that make us uncomfortable, but in ways that create problems that perhaps we're unfortunately more comfortable with. Like, why are we more comfortable with our team members being in chronic stress and burnout than giving them a moment to say, I'm really scared to have this meeting with the donor, and validate that?
Absolutely. It's a world of difference. A lot of times, like you said, it's just that moment. They just want to be heard. They just want to be understood. They're not even looking for someone to fix the issue necessarily even. I mean, obviously there's strategies and things you can talk about, but in a lot of times it's just, I just want to know that what I'm feeling is okay. And just getting that much alone, which we don't get enough of in our society, that alone can be so powerful. And like, I'm not sitting here talking like I'm an expert all this, mastered all this and all the roles that I've done. I'm still heavily learning this and trying to figure it all out. And so I will say, like, this is from experiences, even coaching people in fundraising, for example, where somebody is telling me that I don't like asking people for money. I feel very uncomfortable about this. Like, I feel that fundraising is related to money and it's icky and I don't want to ask people for money, or I don't want to ask someone for their personal support, but I'm happy asking corporations. And so it's like, if I just say, oh, just go do it anyways. Here's 5 ways you can start that conversation. Here's the paragraphs you can use. Here's some sentence starters. Those are still very valuable, clearly. But there's nothing that blockage is there. And no matter what tool or resource I'm going to give you, because that's often what happens in organizations, is that block is going to remain there. So it's like a mindset thing. And it's like, I want you to say, I would tell that person, you know what? Every time I tell someone I do fundraising work, they're like, but I hate asking people for money. And I was like, guess what? So do I. That's not what this is. It's inviting people to make a difference with their generosity. It's giving them a chance to live their values. So tell me, what is it about fundraising and asking for money that's making you nervous? Let's talk about that. Let's understand it and know that you're not alone. A lot of other people feel that way. You can almost see the person's shoulders go down when I say that versus, oh, well, that's okay. Let's just move on to how you're going to do it. And then get to the other conversation. We get to the fruitful conversation around the how, but we had to address that first. You said the word going through. You cannot go around, over, under. You have to go through these emotions. And that's part of it. So I guess sometimes people I've talked to are uncomfortable with like, well, we're not a family. I don't want people sharing everything about their life story and all their problems. And I'm like, I've never said that that's okay. That's the oversharing part. But especially as it relates to the work, and we create a culture where it's okay to talk about our feelings, even towards fundraising, volunteer management, board, whatever it is, all these internal things, because the feelings are all there and they're very common. But if nobody feels they can say something, everyone's going to be like shielded all the time. So a great framework that I love to talk about is my friend wrote a book called Speak Up Culture, my friend Steve Shedletsky. And in this book, he talks about, I definitely read the book, it's great. He talks about two core conditions that have to exist for an organization where people will speak up. One is it safe? Am I going to be penalized for what I say? Am I going to be in trouble if I speak my truth? And is it worth it? Is something going to be done with what I say? Or is it just going to be, I've heard you, it's safe and all that, but we're not going to actually do anything with my feedback. When those two conditions are met, then people will share. They'll be honest, they'll be open. And if it's not and they're penalized, then that defines the culture right there. So that's a really great framework for leaders to use, even in this context too. Is it safe to express how I'm feeling about this situation? And is someone actually going to do something with this? Or are they going to say, yeah, but just go ahead and still do it, even if they do accept my feelings? So it's like, let's work with people from the fact they're human beings. We're not machines. And I get the time piece, but the really interesting thing is it's sort of like when you stretch, right? If you were to try to like get a muscle like more flexible, I've seen those people do really, really deep stretches like right away that they're not ready for, and they like lean into them, and you might actually damage the muscle in that way. But if you just do a little bit, a couple percent, like every day, and hold it, a couple percent every day, hold it, you actually get to where you want faster. So funny enough, I actually believe that doing this not only will get us to the result, but it'll actually get us there faster in the end. That's not why we should do it alone. We should do it because it's the right thing to do. But also, I do believe it's going to actually accelerate the work faster anyways.
100%. Okay. I just want to before we have to go, I want to like triple click on a few things. If you're watching this on video, you've been seeing like my head bobbing like crazy, but the piece when you going back to that kind of example coaching moment that you had with a client, you took the time, right? And I think so many consultants in that moment would have been strategy, like just strategy. You took a beat to give space to their feelings, to talk about it, knowing that doing that was going to make your job, having them implement that strategy so much better, so much faster, so much more effective. That has been true for me too. Like otherwise I'm going to bang my head against the wall for 6 weeks trying to get them to send this email because I didn't have that conversation up front about the resistance they were feeling to sending it. So 100%, I could not agree more that like, and I agree, I always feel this like pull around like, we should do this because it's the right thing to do, because it takes care of people, because it's about being human. And also 100% there's a bottom line implication. So if that's your motivation to take care of people, then I'm going to say it because they are deeply connected. The other thing, I interviewed this woman, Carol Robin, a few years ago now, who wrote this book, Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships. She talks about this idea of appropriate authenticity, which I think is something that you're talking about, right? It's not like tell everybody every single detail about you, but use appropriate authenticity for the environment that you're in. It doesn't mean you're being fake, but you are being intentional about the pieces of yourself that you're sharing. And I think that's really important. The other thing, I've heard you a few times say like, I'm not an expert in this. And I'm curious what you'll think about what I'm about to say, but I found myself also say that a lot, right? I'm like, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. But I've tried to stop myself from saying that because I worry that if we think talking about emotions in any way has to be only for the experts, then then the leaders also, yes, okay, please don't try to pathologize or trauma coach your staff members if you are not certified and trained. But asking questions about emotions and giving space about emotions, I want us to feel like we can all do that. What do you think?
I think that's a great point. When I say it, it's to make it's more relatable that I'm sitting here as somebody who's learned this on the way and saying it's okay for us to do this. Obviously, there's ethical considerations, like you said, where if it's not ethically responsible to have certain types of discussions, of course, don't. But I appreciate what you're saying in terms of let's not say that you have to get to a certain place before you can even start down this. And that I agree with that message completely. Is that we all have to do some of that work. And I mean, I always think of myself as a work in progress. In fact, I don't even know if there is someone other than perhaps psychologists and all who might be even considered experts in this area, but we're all experts at being a human being. So we should be able to have these kinds of conversations and not feel like, oh, well, I don't know what I'm doing. The only way we can really learn about this is to actually try it and do it. And I've messed up along the way, that's for sure. And I get it wrong. And that's, again, part of being human. So I actually really appreciate the point you're making, Mallory, though. That's well taken.
Yeah. And I loved what you just said too. Like, yes, like I want people to hear us having this conversation, knowing that neither of us are like educationally formally trained in, cognitive science, but we are having conversations about things that touch that, because that is about being human. And if we want to be more human in our roles and more connected to each other, to our donors, and able to live in that alignment and values that we so deeply want, then we need to create the space in ourselves and in our relationships with each other to have these conversations.
It's the school of life, baby. It's a school of life.
Yeah.
That's where we learn so much of this. So 100%.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. I could talk to you forever about this, but I'm so grateful. Where can people go to find you, to learn more about you, and to be connected to your work?
Well, thank you again for giving me the space to have this conversation with you. You're right. We could go on for a long time. Find me on LinkedIn, also radianceadvisory.com. You can find me up and have a chat if you want, and just learn more about the kind of work I'm trying to do. And in the end, it is about what are the values that we have and how can we live and breathe those on a day-to-day, on the regular. That's really the experience that shapes values and culture.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for the work that you do. Folks should be going to Run to learn more and connect with you. Thank you for your time and all your wisdom.